what is gaslighting? And where did that term even come from? Okay, so 1938, a guy named Patrick Hamilton wrote a play about a criminal who uses lies and psychological manipulation to try to drive his wife insane. Okay, so husband and wife, they live in a flat in London. Now, the flat above theirs used to belong to a woman who was murdered, apparently for her jewels. And rumor has it the jewels are still up there, hidden in her flat. And her murderer was never found. So, every night, the husband downstairs tells his wife that he's going out to, a nighttime walk or something. But what he's actually doing is breaking into the flat upstairs, the one above theirs, and looking for those jewels. He's sneaking around there, being as quiet as he can. But his wife can hear something going on up there. And every morning she tells him that she heard someone upstairs the night before. But he says, pshaw, she's imagining it. She's hearing steps and creaking and furniture getting dragged around above her in the dark of the night. But her husband says, nah, honey, it's all in your mind. See, he has already tricked her into believing she can't trust herself. So he takes little things like a watch or a picture or a receipt, and he hides them in his desk drawer. And then he convinces her that she's stealing things without remembering that she even did it. Oh, and when she says something about it, no, she's paranoid. She's lying. He's gotten her to doubt her real experiences, to doubt her sanity. And now he gets her to believe that she hears nothing. Oh, and the dark of the night part? That's how the play gets its name. See, back before electricity, the people who could afford it used natural gas to light their homes. There's a little pipe sticking out of the wall, and there'd be a little hole at the end of the pipe. And they would turn on the gas and then put a lit match to that little hole where the gas was coming out. And since that shit was flammable, bam! You got light. Gaslight. But in the play, the pipe that went to the couple's flat also went to the flat upstairs. Same gas pipe, and only so much gas. So each time the husband upstairs, lit the gas so he'd had enough light to search for the jewels, the gas in the downstairs flat would lessen. It would go down a little bit. So each night, while the wife was alone, the light in her room would suddenly dip, and she'd be in semi-darkness, listening to the sounds from upstairs. The sounds her husband said didn't even exist. That's why we call it gaslighting. See, he was messing with her sense of reality to cover up a crime he was in the process of committing. The play was a big hit, and there are two really good movie versions. And the term gaslighting entered the vocabulary. Someone trying to get you to doubt your reality, telling you what you actually saw or experienced, didn't really happen. And you should trust them before you trust yourself. Happens a lot in relationships. I mean, that's when we mainly think of it, So a married guy, it's normally guys, caught cheating, and they tell their partners that they should doubt themselves, saying, are you going to believe me or your lying eyes? So, why am I talking so much about that? Same reason I talk so much about everything. I talk a lot, but also because when it comes to how we view labor in this country, we also have some criminals creeping around upstairs looking for jewels. Only our criminals have been trying to gaslight us for centuries. They have been trying to get us to filter out things we know are true and replace them with things we know aren't. Like, for instance, who has always done the real work in our society? Okay. This country was founded on two basic things: underpaid labor of immigrants and unpaid labor of slaves. That's the foundation. But see, back in those days, immigrant labor was mainly white. poor Irish, poor English, poor Welsh, poor Scottish folks. Now, some had come here on their own dime, but others were what was called indentured servants, which means slave until you can pay off some debt that you owe to some rich bastard. Oh, they could whip you and rape you and treat you like shit under their feet as much as they wanted. But only for a certain number of years until you paid off the debt. Oh, and they didn't automatically own your kids. So indentured servants were like short-term slaves. Now, some were on plantations down south, but a lot were in factories and shipyards up north. and meanwhile, we have the straight up slaves in the north and in the south. Slaves. Normally from Africa. Now, European colonists had tried to enslave Native Americans first, but that didn't work. And not because the Native Americans were too weak and flimsy for the slave masters. And it's like the story that the slave masters and the slave masters historians have said. See, that's just a fucked up myth created by them to blame the natives for being unslave-worthy. The real reason it didn't work was because Native Americans were harder to hold on to. Because they knew that if they escaped, they could just return to their tribe. Now, that tribe may not, they weren't going to be like right outside the plantation, but they weren't that far. And they sure as hell weren't on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. So the Choctaw, Chickasaw, Cherokee, Iroquois, all the East Coast tribes, they knew they could just run home. So they always tried to. And in some cases, they were rescued by their families. Families who also might rain some righteous, well-deserved, and reasonably violent retribution down on the heads of the enslavers. So the slave owners needed to capture and kidnap a population who couldn't just run home because it'd be too far, or who couldn't be rescued because their families didn't know where they were. Africans. So, you got European short-term slaves and African lifelong slaves. That's who built the East Coast. It wasn't the lead characters in all those historical movies about colonial times. The real work was done by the extras running around in the background. Then you add to that all of the workers from China who built the West Coast, and you put them all together and they build the railroads connecting the two. That's who built all of this shit for the first 350 or so years. Immigrants and slaves. After emancipation, it just shifted to the virtual slavery of sharecropping for blacks and the virtual indentured servitude of starvation wage contracts for the immigrants. Oh, and what about all those Mexicans out west? Did you know that most of who we still call cowboys were actually Spanish-speaking Native Americans? See, after the United States took the northern half of Mexico, which the Spanish had already taken from the tribes that lived there, the United States was left with this vast continent of people who didn't speak English. So they just moved into their land, called them foreigners, and treated them like shit. Still do. Never hear about the Mexican cowboys who built the West. But we do hear about, whose names are on all the buildings and streets and hotels and schools. Well, that would be people like Leland Stanford, the Rockefellers, Mark Hopkins, the Vanderbilts, Andrew Carnegie, the railroad and barons and bankers and millionaires, Capitalists. Gaslighting capitalists. And we are still trained, even today, to call them heroes. Oh, and we're also trained to think of we're trained to think of on some subconscious level, to think of those whose hard work is essential to our society, especially if they are black, brown, or immigrants. We are trained to think of them on some level as lazy. Oh, and if those workers are white, They are trained to see themselves as unambitious. Even though we see all of those workers working very hard every day, except on Fox News. See, on Fox, we normally see workers sitting down, and they're labeled entitled. They're labeled ungrateful for what American capitalism has provided them. Lazy. You know, it's just like they pushed the image of lazy slaves. Slaves were the hardest working people this country ever saw. Because if they didn't work hard, they would be destroyed. Whipped, branded, burned, maimed, have their children sold off. Nobody worked harder than slaves. So where did we get the stereotype of the lazy slave? You know, where did that come from? Upstairs. And those people, the ones up there, you know, the CEOs, the investors, the entrepreneurs, the crypto bros, the fund managers, the criminals creeping around upstairs, still looking for jewels. They are still convincing so many of us that they are really the ones doing the hard work today. And that the farm workers and construction workers, the nurses and teachers, and those whose muscles hurt at the end of the day, those who actually get their hands dirty, you know, the people, without whom we would starve to death or bleed to death or be naked, cold, or dumb as bricks, that those workers are a drain on our society. Oh, now sure, corporations will throw some workers in a commercial every once in a while to sell us something. Or politicians who never gave two dry shits for the workers. Well, they use a couple of them. La, la, la. They'll use a couple of them as props to get some votes. But mainly, we got the upstairs folks gaslighting us into believing that the wealth of our nation was not built by the workers in the factories, but by those who own the factories. Not by the sweaty people who work on the farm, but by the hard-working hedge fund managers who own the farms. That the people up in the boardrooms, they're brilliant, skilled, essential, while the workers who actually keep the gears of our country turning are stupid, unskilled, and expendable. Even though we know the truth. We see it with our eyes. We experience it in our lives. We know the truth. But every corporate image, every day, every hour, every minute tells us the opposite. The great gaslighting of the United States working class has always been about the owning class convincing us, the workers, that they, the owners, are the keys to making everything, while we, the workers, know that we, the workers, are the ones who actually make everything. And all they've needed to keep them in power and keep them upstairs has been for enough of we, the people, to agree with their lies, to agree to our own gaslighting. In the end of the play, there's a scene after the husband's crimes have been revealed and he's been arrested and he's tied up and he and his wife are left alone. The husband tries to convince the wife of his innocence. He tries to get her to go to his desk drawer and get his straight razor so she can, cut the ropes and he can escape. But as she finds the razor in his desk, she also finds the watch, the picture, the receipt. The things he'd said she'd lost or stolen in her madness. All hidden where he had put them to make her doubt herself, to gaslight her. And she looks at him with the razor in her hand. And she asks him, well, if she could have been mistaken about so many things, as he has said, how can she even be sure she really has a razor in her hand? And as she walks to him, she asks, Isn't this just another illusion? How can a crazy woman like her help her oh so sane husband? And as she steps behind him, razor in her hand, she says, if only she were not insane, she could help him. But, he's always insisted that she is unbalanced, delusional, out of her mind. So how can such a person possibly help her husband escape? And then she puts that razor to his throat, and his eyes open wide with terror, and he screams, and she does not kill him. Because she's not insane. She has, however, freed herself from him, from his gaslighting. The husband is taken away for murder. Oh, because remember how the murderer of the woman upstairs with the jewels, the murderer was never caught? Spoiler alert. It was him! Ha! So, a happy ending. And maybe we could do that. If we could free ourselves from our gaslighting, if we could see our fellow workers, whether they're immigrants or not, as the real strength of this country, the ones that really make the things. And we could see those upstairs for what they really are. Periodically useful at best, and sociopathic parasites at worst. Maybe our story will also end happily with some of the folks upstairs and some elected officials and the suits from the boardroom. Maybe we'll see some of them tied up and begging for mercy, for they're led away for their crimes. And while we hold the razor in our hands. Anyway, that's where the term gaslighting comes from.